Welcome everybody to Krystal, Kyle, and Friends. Hope everybody's having a good day. Although it's kind of difficult to nowadays.
Yeah.
It's been a rough one. The shooting itself and all the news surrounding that was like tough enough to talk about and get through and dwell on and think about. But then watching the reaction to it, it reminded me how just totally soulless and broken our political discourse is.
Everybody, before they know anything, immediately reaches for like whatever their particular like culture war obsession is at that moment, and then just tries to like feed whatever happened through that lens, even when the facts are completely different from what they want them to be.
Yeah, and to be fair, I don't think when people on the left jump immediately to talking about guns, I think that's rational. I don't think that's like, let me find my niche culture war issue. I think that's like, let me actually try to find the thing that would stop this from happening.
Yes.
Whereas on the right, there's just so many. I mean, I did a segment talking about 50 plus just deranged solutions they gave where they were just bending over backwards. They turned into Neo from the Matrix to avoid talking about guns at all. They were like, oh.
Right. Well, the thing that, first of all, let me say that I agree with your point in terms of the thing that I hate is when people are like, oh, we can't talk about politics. We have to like just grieve. Well, of course, this is a political situation.
Everything's political. Yeah.
Everything's political. The conditions that created the society that leads to us having these mass shootings over and over and over again in a way that other countries don't. Of course, those conditions are political. So just to be clear, I think this is political. It's political from the beginning. It should be discussed in a political way because that's just our way of coming together as a society and saying these horrific things keep happening, shocking all of our conscience. What are we actually going to do about it together? In terms of the particular difficulties the right has had this week in responding to this tragedy is their normal go-to is we need more good guys with guns. Well, in this instance, first of all, the quote unquote good guys with guns were there on the scene from the beginning. And the more we learn, the more we see dramatic failures. And of course, those good guys with guns, scores of them that were on the scene, were unable to prevent 19 children and 2 adults from being massacred.
I'd go further. I think they chose not to prevent it. They made the decision not to prevent it. I think every single cop in the Uvalde, Texas Police Department who was in any way, even a roundabout way, involved with basically the stand down order and holding the perimeter to stop the parents from going in, every one of them should be behind bars. I don't know what criminal charges you can come up with in order to lock them up. There's obviously a very unique situation, and I don't know what laws there are around it.
Yeah.
But at the very least, I want the parents to sue the pants off of the entire police department, and I want them all to get paid. I want them all to get millions and millions of dollars. Not that that would make up for the fact that they just lost their 9-year-old kids.
There will be no
but
justice.
No, they should absolutely. And there was, by the way, there was an armed guard at the school.
Yeah.
And the armed guard didn't stop it.
And the stories kept changing. They clearly lied.
They were covering their asses.
Completely. I mean, even some of the basics of the initial reports were he was wearing body armor. So that was an excuse of why they weren't able to actually like disable him before he even got into the school. Oh, he's wearing body armor. Well, it turns out that wasn't true.
And even if he was, you still got to fucking try. Go try. This is your job.
But that was the other piece was the initial report was that the school officer who was armed, that he quote unquote engaged with him outside of the school, with the implication being that there was gunfire exchange and he was trying to take this guy down even before he went into the school. Well, that report has evolved as well to no, he didn't fire at him. He just let him go into the school and then followed him in. Then they tried to say, oh, we contained him in a classroom.
My ass.
Contained him in a classroom where he was left free to slaughter 19 children and 2 adults for over an hour. I mean, the idea that this was some like tactical decision, no, he ran into that classroom where he committed his massacre and you did nothing for an hour. I mean, so anyway, their good guys with guns narrative is not going to work out in this regard. Well, so they've got to go to anything and everything else that they possibly can to avoid talking about what is, clearly like it's not an answer to everything, but some of these basic reforms that have been popular and have been routinely blocked, that's the obvious direction to go in.
To be fair, there was a good guy with a gun. It was a Customs and Border Patrol officer who went in there and killed the guy. And that's the only person in this entire story who is commendable. Everybody else is shameful, and I'm not kidding when I say they should be locked behind bars. They're all completely guilty. I don't hear a single fucking word out of them because they were lying from the beginning the second they opened their damn mouths.
Yeah.
And I'm equally as mad at the officers as I am at the fucking mass murderer. How about that? You like that? How's that for a controversial take? They stood there and didn't do their jobs when they should have done their jobs. Look, I digress. Let's get into a different angle of this story because this is something that I wanted to talk about on my channel. I didn't have the time yet, but I could also get your take on it now too. So Candace Owens decided to chime in this whole tragedy. And, you know, what a wonderful person to hear from when you're talking about a tragedy and a mass shooting where you have dead bodies of children involved. So she says, and I quote, "Mental illness is now high fashion in Western society. But when tragedy strikes, all of the individuals and institutions that perpetuate mental illness pretend to be shocked. Quote, how could this happen in a society that discourages masculinity and puts children on puberty blockers?" So in case that's a little, unclear what she's saying there, let me break it down for you into layman's terms. She's saying, ultimately, the people really responsible for what happened here are trans people and people who support trans people. That's who's responsible for the shooting. That's the argument that she's making. There's so many things I can say about it. I mean, right off the bat, look,
what?
Just that first line, mental illness is now high fashion in Western society.
What does that even mean?
I don't even know what that means. Here's the reality. Mental illness used to have a massive stigma on it where you can't even say, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have whatever. There used to be like, just don't ask, don't tell policy when it comes to mental health. In recent times, that stigma has kind of, sort of, not really begun to lift just a little bit, where now people can mention, I have depression, I have anxiety, or whatever. What she's saying is, oh, no, now you're glorifying mental illness, and that's how we got to where we are right now. No, it would be nice if we lived in a society where people could be honest about the problems that they face, and then they get, support from people around them. This idea that, you're holding it up on a pedestal, is the idea we're trying to, act like this guy was some sort of hero before they did what they did?
Well, I'm so confused by this. I mean, I'm not confused because obviously this goes to the point of you just take whatever your particular culture war obsessions are of the moment and then weirdly glom them on to something that has nothing to do with any of this.
Nothing at all.
And then also, though, I mean, people like Candace Owens and others on the right were the ones who were deeply concerned about mental health during COVID lockdowns. But now suddenly it's like, mental health, who cares if that's crazy to be obsessed with that and you people are glorifying it.
I think she's saying mental health is the problem, but the trans issues are the result of the mental health crisis. I don't even know. By the way, okay, there was a rumor going around that started on 4chan that the person who did the shooting, it was transgender, a leftist, and an undocumented immigrant. And it turns out not a single one of those things are true. You want to know why? Because 4chan is dog shit. That's why. They just make stuff up. They're conspiracy theorists. They're a bunch of weirdos, totally disconnected from society, complete hacks politically. And we had a congressman, Representative Paul Gosar, casually tweeted it as if it was factual. And then for the first time in his life, maybe ever, he took just a modicum of accountability and was like, oh shit, this isn't true. And then he deleted the tweet, but he put it up there anyway. Like you said, this all has to do with, I don't like trans people. How can I find a way to spin this story in a way that goes after trans people when trans people have absolutely nothing to do with it?
Totally irrelevant.
The way, even if the shooter was trans,
right,
that wouldn't mean anything.
Right.
If a gay shooter does it, if a gay person does a shooting, does that mean all gay people are somehow responsible?
Mass murderers.
There's something inherently villainous about gay people and they're all mass murderers? Or, nobody ever said if there's let's say a young white male who does a shooting, which is a relatively common occurrence, relatively speaking. And does that mean that, some 18-year-old white kid is by definition collectively guilty for it because they share the same sort of identity?
Yeah, or somehow inherently, seeded with evil because he's a young white male. Yeah, it's a ridiculous notion. And then, I mean, the immediate place I saw people on the right go with this was the moment that his name was released. There was this instant assumption of must be an illegal, must be one of the illegals. And then, of course, it comes out, no, he's from North Dakota. Thank you very much. But there are so many dodges. I mean, I saw some, let's be clear, too. I did see some ridiculous takes from the left as well, feeding things through their own, cultural predisposition.
This guy was pro-gun and he supported Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah.
Therefore, what? It's okay his daughter died? His fucking 9-year-old innocent daughter? What are you talking about?
The other one I saw a lot of was this take of okay, so the white Buffalo shooter is taken alive, but this one is killed on the scene as evidence of like people basically saying like they should have been able to take him alive too, which I mean, listen, in an ideal world, sure, he stands trial and has to, but the thing I'm upset about is that they didn't go in there faster and take this guy out sooner. So again, there's just this instinct to whatever your sort of priors are, whatever your particular obsessions are, whatever you think your bases or your audience's obsessions are, forget about the facts. Just go ahead and put it out there and get your tweets and your retweets and your likes. Gosar was a particularly disgraceful and obvious example. And this dude's a member of Congress, you know? And, and just happy to take whatever bullshit is percolating on 4chan and spread it like it's fact. It's ridiculous.
The point from Candace is like, the fact that we have trans people and some trans acceptance is evidence of broken institutions and a corrupt system and a decaying society. What I find astonishing is that somebody like Candace Owens can look at our country and everything that's going on in it right now, and she goes to trans people as her go-to like evidence of a downfall of society. What about, I don't know, the 30 million Americans that don't have health insurance in the midst of a pandemic, or the 45,000 Americans that die every year because they don't have basic health care, or the fact that half of working people make $30,000 a year or less. Like, I could list the fact that homelessness is skyrocketing. They say that we only have 400,000 or 500,000 homeless people. There's way more than that at this point, I think. So you look at all these problems in society. How about the fact that we're a permanent war culture? People alive today, kids who are like turning 21 today, for example, they've never lived in a period in the U.S. when we weren't at war. We've been at war nonstop. That's
actually a really good point. And I just learned this in researching the last horrific mass shooting, which just happened in Buffalo, which is that when you have war when a society goes to war, there is a spike in violence at home following that war. It's like a very predictable relationship. And you also had a spike associated with racist violence. So Klan membership spiked after each of our major wars. And so, you know, I think that's actually a really important point, that when you have a society that is militarized, that, you know, is engaging in, you can't think that the violence is just going to stay overseas. You do see these broader trends. But the most obvious thing in the world, and I don't think either one of us would say that the gun laws, which are feasible and in potential, you know, in play to get passed, are going to solve all of the problems. But you have the chance for some harm reduction on the margins with some basic reforms that would make it a little bit harder to get a gun, that would put, you know, red flag laws in place so that if someone is clearly deeply troubled, as this person obviously was, that there's a process where that can be flagged. If it seems like they can be proven through a, you know, official judicial process that they are a potential harm to themselves or others, that they can be kept from purchasing a firearm for some period of time. These are basic things that, are they going to solve everything? No. Will they help on the margins? Yes. We should not give up on at least doing the basics to make things better. And, you know, the mental health thing is a classic Republican dodge. They always, and Greg Abbott, governor of Texas, did this in his press conference, didn't talk about guns at all, but wanted to talk all about, we need to do more for mental health. Well, he gets asked a question. Okay, well, are you going to actually, you're governor of this state, are you going to use the funds through ACA expansion that you could to expand mental health care to more of your own citizens? Of course not.
Yeah, they never.
Of course not.
That's the point I always make, is like, look, if you want to have that conversation about mental illness, I'm fine having that conversation about mental illness.
Yeah.
It absolutely is a problem. But the solutions to that are, if we had a Medicare for all system with universal mental health care, that'd be fine. Even if they proposed a standalone bill on just universal mental health care, I'd still support that bill. There was a bill that came up during the Obama administration. I'm blanking on the name of it now, but that provided mental health care through the Affordable Care Act. They all voted against it.
Yeah.
It's the same thing they did with, like, you know, the baby formula in Ukraine thing. They were like, why are we sending $40 billion to Ukraine when we have a baby formula shortage over here? Then the bill comes up to send millions of dollars to fix the baby formula shortage, and they all vote against it.
Right.
So they're just posturing morons. And to get back to the final point I wanted to make about Candace Owens is, I don't know if you remember this, but maybe more than a decade ago, maybe 2 decades ago, there was some hurricane that, maybe it was Hurricane Katrina, actually, come to think of it now. Yeah, it was, because it was in New Orleans. Hurricane Katrina destroyed New Orleans in 2004, I believe it was. Pat Robertson got a lot of flack because immediately in the aftermath of that, he said it's because they have gay pride parades.
Yeah,
that's why the hurricane hit there.
That's
what
right.
Candace Owens is doing is the modern secular version of that exact same thing that Pat Robertson did. Somehow spinning a mass shooting that has nothing to do with trans people in any way, shape, or form and being like, well, look at what goes on with trans people in this country. What do you expect? What the fuck does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. You don't like trans people. You don't like, okay, got it, understand. Well, then don't get in your feelings anytime somebody calls you a bigot because you're wearing it on your sleeve. It's not that hard to break it down. There's no leaps of logic here to say, oh, you don't like trans people. And it's very clear it's a broad thing. It's not like any one individual trans person who's an asshole. No, you just don't like trans people. You don't like the community. And it's obvious.
Yeah. And the minute that there were those photos that were spread of claims that there was a trans person, that the shooter was a trans person, the amount of people on the right that jumped on that and just assumed that was true and went with it, also very telling.
Yeah, totally.